This is a wonderful pleasure to be here and doing this session online with Secretary Carlos Gutierrez, who was the co-founder, who is the co-founder and CEO of Empath Inc. and SaaS technology platform that uses machine learning to transform the way talent is managed and grown inside a company. Previously, Secretary Gutierrez served as chair of the Albright Stonebridge Group, a global strategic advisory firm. Secretary Gutierrez served as U.S. Secretary of Commerce from 2005 to 2009 under President George W. Bush, where he worked with foreign governments and business leaders to advance economic relationships, enhance trade, and promote U.S. exports. Secretary Gutierrez played a key role in the passage of landmark free trade agreements that remove trade barriers, expand exports opportunities, and boost global investment. Secretary Gutierrez spent nearly 30 years with Kellogg Company, a global manufacturer and marketer, a well-known food brand. After assignment in Latin America, Canada, Asia, and the United States, he became president and chief executive officer of Kellogg in 1999, the youngest CEO in the company's 100 years history. In April 2000, he was named chairman of the board of Kellogg Company. Secretary Gutierrez joined ASG, from Citi, where he was vice chairman of the institutional clients group and a member of the senior strategic advisory group. He currently serves on the boards of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, U.S. India Business Council, the Bow Forum for Asia, Occidental Petroleum Corporation, MetLife, and PricewaterhouseCoopers as an external board member. Secretary Gutierrez was born in Havana, Cuba. He is married to Idila and has 3 grandchildren. Mr. Secretary, thank you so much for joining this online e-CAMCA session, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Sami. Thank you very much. And it's a pleasure to be on with you, and thank you for moderating this session. I was going to talk a little bit about anything that you hadn't mentioned in my bio, but I think you've covered it very thoroughly. I spent half of my time outside of the United States and half of the time in the US. So I had a strategy where I always said yes when they asked me if I wanted to move. So I started in Mexico. We worked twice in Mexico, 3 times in Battle Creek at the Michigan at the headquarters, once in Canada, and then once in Australia, where I managed Asia Pacific. So I see the world through that view, a very global view. Globalization today is not as much in favor as it was several years ago. I still believe it's the way of the world, and it's unstoppable, and it is a mega trend. I'm also a big believer in trade, and I know that trade has become somewhat controversial. So we're living in this moment where a lot of the things that we held to be true are being challenged. But that has happened throughout history, and eventually I think people in society see the wisdom of certain trends. So I'm going to leave it there. I really want to hear from you. I want to answer your questions. I want to engage in the dialogue. Please feel free. I know Sami will ask questions and then we'll turn it over, but I'm looking forward to the dialogue, and thank you for your interest, and thank you for being here.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mr. Secretary, and it is a real pleasure to be talking to you. I remember my first memory from you when we met in 2011. I was part of the fall, batch that year. But let me start my questions. As you know, one of the organizers of this 2021 e-CAMCA Forum is the Rumsfeld Foundation. And Secretary Rumsfeld's interest in the broader Central Asian region is a major part of the inspiration that has led to the e-CAMCA Forum's development. As I understand, when Mr. Rumsfeld served as Secretary of Defense in the George W. Bush administration, he encouraged you as then Secretary of Commerce and other cabinet members to engage with and visit our region. Can you tell us a bit about Secretary Rumsfeld's pitch and what your experience as was like at the beginning with him?
Thank you. Yes, in fact, Secretary Rumsfeld was on the board of Kellogg, so I knew him before government and have always admired his service. He asked every cabinet secretary to visit that region, to be visible, and it was a way of getting back into those relationships because we felt that we had been separated for so long. We didn't know each other well. We didn't have those relationships. So I had the tremendous privilege of visiting countries such as Iraq, Afghanistan. I was twice in Afghanistan, and once went to the border with Tajikistan to open up the bridge for commerce. Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, Georgia. So for me, it was an eye-opener to see the potential, to see the energy in those countries, to develop new relationships. I personally found that people were very easy to engage with. The values were similar. The way to approach human relations was very comfortable. So to this day, I feel that there is a tremendous opportunity. And as Secretary Rumsfeld has done, is to continue to build those relationships. We are far away geographically, but we are coming closer and closer the more we do forums and events like this. So I'm very proud to be part of that effort.
Oh, thank you so much. Just a follow-up question. Why Central Asia mattered at that time for the George W. Bush administration so much that yourself and Secretary Rumsfeld, everyone was so much interested in the region? Why? I mean, what made the region so important for you?
Well, there was a feeling, a sense that because those countries had been part of the Soviet Union, that they had been very separated from the rest of the world and very much the Western world, North America, the US. So we felt that we had to take an extra effort to get closer. But they were countries that we knew very little about because of the fact that they were under the umbrella of the Soviet Union. And after the Soviet Union ceased to be, then we felt it was time. It was time to engage with an important region of the world that we had not done so before. Our engagement was with the Soviet Union primarily through Moscow. So this was an opportunity to get closer to these countries on an individual basis.
Yeah, that's very true and very important points. As the U.S. Secretary of Commerce, you played a key role in the passage of multiple landmark free trade agreements that stripped away trade barriers and expanded export opportunities. Can you share with us some insights on the free trade agreements process and your advice for successfully managing negotiations with neighboring countries?
Well, that's a great question. It's a very complicated question. You know, when I arrived in the government in early 2005, we were getting ready to pass the Central America Free Trade Agreement. And even back then, it was a very controversial subject. Democrats did not like trade that much. Republicans did. And the Central America Free Trade Agreement was so easy to agree with because we had barriers exporting to Central America. Central American countries did not have barriers exporting to the US, and this agreement just took out all the barriers. But even at that, we won the vote by one vote, as logical as it seemed. And after that, it became more and more difficult to pass free trade agreements. We weren't able to pass Colombia, Panama, South Korea during the administration. That was done later on in the Obama administration. I think what happens is that trade is good on a macroeconomic basis. If you look at numbers for a given country, the country as a whole benefits, whether it's GDP, employment, income for the types of jobs that are created for exports. The problem is that some communities get impacted. And after time, there are more and more small communities that are impacted by trade. And I believe, looking back now, all the way back to NAFTA, 1994, 95, we could have paid more attention to the impact that we were having on communities. Because we all looked at the national numbers and we said, look at these numbers, they're great. The numbers, if you take NAFTA, for example, Canada, US, and Mexico, for each of the three countries, the macroeconomic numbers were better. GDP growth, unemployment, inflation, things that had been a problem before were no longer a problem after NAFTA. But there were communities that really, really did suffer. And it's interesting to see that about 25 years later, let's say 20 years later, with the election of President Trump, he was elected on an anti-trade platform. And that was the building up of the resentment of people who felt that it was only an elite group of people who believed in trade, who benefited from trade, but no one was paying attention to the communities that were impacted by trade. So if I would say one thing, a lesson is pay attention to those who will be impacted negatively. There will be a lot of positive effects, but pay attention to those communities that will be impacted. There are things that can be done in advance. We don't have to wait for 20 years for things to build up. Also, when you talk about trade with other countries, the negotiations should be beneficial to both parties. If one party goes in thinking, I want to win, and therefore they're going to lose, the agreement will not be successful long-term. So it has to be a mutually beneficial relationship, what some call a win-win.
Oh, that's, yeah, very important, the win-win, I mean, mindset, especially leaders in the stronger countries believe in that. So you were talking about how to take care of communities not losing and not suffering because of the trade agreements. Can you give us some examples of, I mean, communities who suffered because of international trade agreements?
Well, for example, the NAFTA impacted some manufacturing, and some manufacturing left some communities and went to Mexico. The benefits there were that the cost was lower, so therefore these companies were able to be more competitive on an international basis. But back then, there wasn't really a focus on retraining people to be able to go to other jobs, having special programs to attract investments. Another part of the economy that was impacted was in the South, textile manufacturing. When China joined the WTO, we had a surge of imports from China in textiles. It was just tremendous. And a lot of textile mills went out of business. And in many cases, they were the foundation of the economy of these communities. Today, in many of those communities, North Carolina, South Carolina, there is new investment, high-tech investment, banking, financial services, Boeing, high-tech manufacturing, because leaders had the vision, the foresight to begin to attract new investment to offset the loss of jobs. Perhaps it happened a little bit too late because it happened after the jobs were lost. But I think it's a good example of what can be done in order to make up for these losses. I think the lesson is we have to start earlier. We have to foresee that there will be job loss. Right now, as we look at the world environment and we look at the advance of technology, there is no question that there are going to be millions of jobs lost all over the world, and the U.S. is not not outside of that border. They're right in the middle of it. So what we should be doing today is reskilling people. It's all about skills, and that's what I do in the new company Empath. Is we focus on identifying employee skills and then identifying where we need to help the employees upskill or reskill, because of technology, skills that were important 2 years ago may not be important today. So it's important that we constantly be upskilling and reskilling people. And that's also a lesson that we left people alone and we didn't give them new skills, and the skills that they had were no longer as in demand as they once were.
That's true, and I assume that the world, post-pandemic world, is facing even more problems. As we are emerging from the pandemic, what do you think are some of the top challenges facing the global economy, as well as some of the possible new opportunities at hand?
Yeah, the pandemic accelerated trends. And one of the trends that it accelerated was digital technology, a move to a digital economy. So in the past, e-commerce represented a relatively small percentage of commerce in the U.S. Today, it's doubled. So that has had an impact on the economy. It's had an impact on supply chains, the adoption of technology. We're talking today on Zoom. At the beginning, we thought Zoom was, something that you do or that is a permanent, or I'm sorry, is a temporary solution during COVID. Today, we realize it's not. This is permanent, and this is the way we're going to do business for a long time. I do business today with people I've never met. I've met through webinars and through Zoom calls. So this is the future, and it was happening slowly, but now it's happening very fast, and that's why we have to get ready for it, so that we're not in 10 years and 15 years, we don't have another buildup of resentment that we left people alone and we didn't help them upskill and reskill, and we didn't get them ready for a new economy. So there's no question that what we have seen during COVID is we've brought forward probably a decade of trends, maybe 2 decades.
Absolutely true. And, given the pandemic challenges and the new opportunities and trends that you were just talking about, I wanted to ask, do you have any key recommendations for how business in the CAMCA region can use, and the leaders, how they can use the digital revolution to empower their capabilities and in global reach?
Yes, that's a great question. And it goes back to technology and how technology has facilitated commerce and trade and the formation of small businesses. There are small businesses today in the US, in Brazil, I'm sure in the South Central Asian region that export, say, to China. 20 years ago, it would have been crazy to think that that a small company can just export to China. Today, because of e-commerce, because of these supply chains such as Amazon, Alibaba, so many others, you can start a business in Kyrgyzstan, for example, and export to China without having to have your own supply chain, your own warehouses, your own shipping, because you're using someone else's and you're using their technology infrastructure. So I would recommend that people think about that, because what drives an economy, yes, it is small businesses, but more than anything, it's new business. And new businesses today are easier to open because of technology. And all of a sudden you can find yourself that you are an exporter because of these digital tools.
Yeah, as we are talking about the digital tools and the new trends, and you're serving as chairman of the and CEO of Impact, can you tell us more about your own company and what the future of work looks like for you and the Impact team?
Yes, thank you for asking that question. We're very passionate about this. We believe that the future is about skills. Too often we pay only attention to the university or who someone knows or whether they know how to make a good presentation. In the future, we believe what's going to count is what skills do they have? What do they know how to do? So what we do through machine learning is we use the information inside of a company and we identify an employee's skills. Sounds incredible, but this is what technology can do. And then we show the employee, look, our machine learning, our artificial intelligence says these are your skills. Is that true? And 95% accuracy, 95% of the time, employees said yes. And then we also identify proficiency levels, 1 through 4, and 80% accuracy and proficiency levels. So what that allows is, instead of having generic training programs for people, every single individual can have his or her training program based on their skills, based on their aspirations, based on where they need to have new skills. Instead of just looking at, a university degree from 10 years ago, the people who move ahead are people who have the skills needed for today and for tomorrow. So companies are going to become skills-based meritocracies. In the corporate world, there are performance reviews and coaching sessions that companies have with their employees. And very often it's, the supervisor telling the employee, this is what you're good at. And, it becomes very anecdotal and very subjective. The conversation in the future will be around skills. These are what your skills are, and what can we do to help? Where would you like to be in the future? Where would you need to upskill? And so it's objective and it's based on tangible actions that can be taken. That's what we believe the future of work is, a skills-based meritocracy based on what people can do, learning organizations that are constantly giving people new skills that they need for the future, not just for today or that they needed 5 years ago, because what's happening is because of technology, skills are changing very rapidly. The skills required are changing very rapidly.
Yeah, I was Milton Friedman, the very well-known American economist. He once said that in the beginning of 1990s, someone asked from him about the future of the Central Asian countries. He would say that privatization. But then he changed his idea and said, now I think the rule of law is more important at the beginning. Because you have worked extensively for the government and the private sector. So there's a big question, what is the right balance of partnership between the government, I mean the private sector and the state sector? What is the right balance, and what kind of advice you have for emerging economies such as the Central Asia and Afghanistan?
Well, I will tell you what the experience in the US has been. And this is a great economy, and what has worked here is a focus on the rule of law, because if the rule of law is predictable, that will attract more investment. And if you attract more private investment, that will create more jobs. More jobs will create more prosperity. That's the private sector model, the traditional capitalist model. And there's always tension between how much of that balance should be in the hands of the government, how much of that balance should be in the hands of private companies. But the agreement is, the fundamental agreement is that private sector involvement, engagement, leadership is key to growing an economy and to being prosperous. And I think that is the strategic question that countries need to ask is, what is the role of the private sector? How much power do we want to give the private sector? In some cases, there are governments that are reluctant to give the private sector too much power. Our experience is that if there is rule of law and it's clear how the private sector can and cannot use that power, then it works. It helps an economy grow. It helps a society grow. But I think those are big strategic questions. I don't want to say that the only model that people should adopt is the US model. What I can say is that the US model has worked for the US, and that it would be wise for countries to look to the US model. There will always be a role for the governments. The question is, how much? As you know, if you go to an extreme of, say, Marxism, it's 100%. But Can you have 10%? Can you have 20? Can you have 30? I think that's the conversation. I think that's the discussion. But what is the role of the private sector and what is the balance between private and public? I think that is the debate, and that will drive outcomes. It will drive results depending on where a country decides to be.
Yeah, I mean, because of the great power the United States is, military and economic power, so many countries are interested to engage with the United States. But given the US troops withdrawal from Afghanistan now, what do you think? What is the best way for our region's countries to approach the United States and engage for economic relationships? I mean, more effective economic relationships with the United States.
Well, I believe that I prefer commerce versus military engagements. I'm not a defense policy expert, so what I would recommend is closer commercial relationships. A free trade agreement requires a certain amount of advances in processes and laws and certain procedures. Perhaps you don't start with a free trade agreement. Perhaps you start with a bilateral investment treaty. And that leads you to step by step, it leads you to the opportunity and the possibility of a full trade agreement. But you start little by little. That is, I believe, the best way to engage with the US. There will be times when that engagement gets linked to geopolitical issues, and that then gets you into a different territory. But my recommendation would be to engage on the basis of commercial opportunities. That isn't to say that there aren't geopolitical necessities and that there aren't geopolitical issues. There will always be. They have to be addressed. But I would hope that more and more we move toward commerce being the common language, as opposed to simply military engagements.
Yeah, but from your point of view, what are like 2 or 3 main commerce or trade interests that the United States still have in the region in Central Asia? What are those interests, you think?
Well, you know, a lot depends on the countries, and it depends on geography as well. Geography is a big determinant of a country's strategy. Afghanistan, for example, does not have access to the ocean. That is a very important issue because you have to go through Pakistan in order to get to India. And that there are problems, there are geopolitical problems, and that impacts trade. Kazakhstan is rich in materials, oil. That can be an opportunity. So every country has its competitive advantages. In some cases, it can be agriculture. We were exploring at one time agriculture in Afghanistan, agriculture in countries around that region where there were bread baskets at one time as so-called bread baskets. So every country has its competitive advantage. Every country has its unique opportunities. And I would say invest in those opportunities and try to leverage those opportunities. Now, it doesn't mean you have to stay there. And that if you're an agricultural economy today, you always will be an agricultural economy. But I think you can use the proceeds from agriculture to invest in other parts. But every single country has something unique. And I think the opportunity is to find that uniqueness and then help people help people open businesses, find a way to leverage those points of differentiation.
Yeah, and as you said, geography plays a very key role here, and all of us are landlocked countries. Afghanistan and our all Central Asian neighbors are landlocked, and we are paying a very high price for the geographical location. But the next panel following our conversation this morning will address the impediments to attracting foreign investment in the region, both the tangible existing barriers as well as the perception of difficulties that leads to investor apprehension. In part due to the general lack of knowledge about the region, addressing the tangible impediments to foreign investment may be difficult, but it is a bit more straightforward. What would your advice be for how to improve the broader perception of the region?
Well, part of the problem is that, unfortunately, boards of directors or CEOs sometimes read an article in The Economist and say, "Oh my goodness, that country, I can't, we can't do business there." So I think that companies need to have people on the ground. They need to be more worldly, more sophisticated, and understand that if you read an article about crime in one city, it doesn't mean that the whole country is becoming a crime zone. But from the standpoint of attracting investment, predictability, certainty, the lack of certainty is the enemy of capital. So if capital believes that an investment will not be protected, that there are geopolitical and political issues that are so volatile that their capital will not be protected, then that will hold up countries. It's a matter of predictability and certainty. There are countries around the world. I remember an example of Colombia, where as you know, in this part of the world, in South America, Colombia has been a country that has been plagued with violence. And in the early 80s, I was asked to sell our company in Colombia, and I didn't succeed because no one wanted to buy it. When I became CEO, I was very glad that nobody bought it because it was a great business. So just because there are problems doesn't mean that you cannot do business. So you have to find ways of getting people on the ground to come, trade missions, sponsoring visits from companies, having people go and if you have a company that has been successful, use that company to explain that not everything is as one may read in one article, but it is about predictability and certainty. And if people say the environment is uncertain because the politics are uncertain and the geopolitical aspects are very uncertain, uncertainty is the enemy of investment.
Absolutely. And as you know, a key goal of the CAMCA Forum is to encourage regional cooperation. From your perspective, what are the potential economic benefits of such cooperation in our region? Do you believe that the region would become more attractive to potential investors, foreign investors, and its economic linkages if are further developed and more strengthened?
Yes. We're talking about geography in the last couple of questions, and geography is everything. It really determines so many things about a country. One of the things that you can see as you analyze commerce and trade information is that countries tend to do more business with other countries that have geographic proximity. For example, Mexico is a big trading partner of the US. It's one or two in imports, exports, depending on the period you look at. Kazakhstan and Russia, Belarus and Russia, you know, they're close, they're next door. Asia and China. Why? Because they're close. So sometimes companies or countries like to say, well, I want to export to China. That's a good idea, but why don't you start with exporting to Canada? They're right next door. Or start with exporting to Mexico or to Central America. And I would say the same thing for your region. Look at your neighbors. Look at the geographic proximity. Look at where you can access markets that are close. You know, everything is help. Shipping, communications, travel. It's a great way to start, and it helps the whole region. So I haven't seen the numbers recently, but my guess would be that most of the trade is done inside the region. Geographic proximity is very important, and I would take advantage of that. European Union is another example. Geographic proximity. The European Union does most of its trade inside of the European Union. That's the reality.
That's true, but at the same time, European Union may have, you know, big markets. There is Germany. You have France, you have Italy, you have so many other big economies there. So maybe countries in the regions like ours, they are looking also for greater markets. So therefore, they are more interested to do business with the outside of the region, but also very true that if we do more business inside the region, maybe every one of us and all of us would prosper eventually. So my last question, and then we will move to the questions we receive from the participants of this panel. During work, you became the youngest CEO, and the key fellows in our audiences are rising leaders in their respective countries who aspire to, you know, top leadership roles in the future. What do you think are some of the most important qualities of an effective leader? And I should repeat that I still remember your speech about the qualities of a good and strong leader from 2011.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that. And, you know, if you would have asked me this question 30 years ago, I would have answered it very differently. So one's opinion of leadership evolves as you have more experience and make more mistakes and become a little bit wiser. But I'll give you a few things. One is that people have to have the will to lead. You know, everyone wants to be the boss, but having the will to lead and taking the risk to lead, because leadership is risky. You have to tell people we're going this way, and if they follow you and you fail, it's your accountability. Not everyone wants to be the leader. Everyone wants to be the boss, but that doesn't mean they want to be the leader. I think self-awareness is important. The leader doesn't have to be the best at everything. And if you would have asked me 25, 30 years ago, I thought that the leader had to be the smartest person in the room. They had to have the answer to every question, and they had to make every decision. And that was very wrong. It's actually the opposite. A leader should know what they're good at and what they're not good at, because no one is good at everything. And then surround yourself with people who are good at the things that you're not good at. But that self-awareness takes a long time. And it takes a certain amount of confidence to say, look, this is who I am. I'm good at this, but I'm not good at that. Believing in something bigger than yourself, I think, is important. If you're the head of a team, that team is more important than you. If you're the head of a division, that division is more important than you. If you're the head of a company, that company is more important than you. And then, of course, if you're the head of the country, that country is more important than you are. And it's how you project yourself. If people see that the head of the division cares more about their career than they do about the division, they'll follow you because they have to. They'll work for you because they have to. But what they want to see is that you believe in something bigger than yourself. And that is projected in everything you do. That is so important. So that's what I would say. That's what I have learned.
And those are very, very important points about leadership, the quality of a good leader versus someone who just, claims to be a leader. So we have got a question from one of our wonderful fellows from Georgia, Irakli Laitadze. She says, Secretary Gutierrez, free trade causes an effective allocation of resources. On the other hand, one of the trading partner can be on a low value added side of the transaction. Say it exports agricultural products or produces any industrial stuff that require low qualification, because this is where it is comparative advantage is. But I have not heard any country in the last 50 years that have been lifted out of the poverty, say by agriculture. Is there a scope for government intervention? Can you hear me?
Yeah, yes, now I can. Yes.
So I will continue. So say baby, okay, is there a scope for government intervention, baby industry production, educational and vocational training, reskilling, etc., to move the country away from the direction towards which the market forces are naturally dragging it to?
It's an excellent question. I will say that, if we look at take one industry, the evolution of textiles, which is low wages, low skill. That started in Manchester, England, in the 1800s, and then people found that they can do it at a better price in Massachusetts. So a lot of the manufacturing moved to the colonies. And then they realized they could do it even more productively in the southern part of the United States, South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama. They moved. Now they moved to Central America. So there is an evolution. The US was once an agricultural country. I think what the questioner said about vocational training is key. It's about people, and it's about what your people can do. I don't believe that governments in general, and I'll start with the United States. I don't believe we are paying enough attention to skills. I don't believe that we are talking enough about how technology is going to change all of our jobs, every one of our jobs, and we're not getting prepared for it. In this big stimulus budget that everyone is talking about, there's very little in there that I read about skilling and educational centers and vocational centers and using digital tools to be able to upskill. So I would say if there's one thing that governments can do is pay attention to their populations, pay attention to the skills, give people the tools to be able to upskill, and then they can do things like start a new business. And they can move from agriculture into the city, and in the city start a new business. but it's something that we're not paying attention to. I think the questioner is right on by focusing on that. And that is the role of private and public sector, and where the public sector is the majority of the economy. I think there is an obligation to prepare people for a changing economy. It will always be changing. Very much the same way that we had to prepare people for the Industrial Revolution. People weren't ready, but they had to be ready. Today, we have to prepare ourselves for the next revolution. But at the beginning, start with what you have. Start with what you're good at. That gets you income, and you can use that income to train people to attract new investment.
Mr. Secretary, thank you so much for this conversation. We are very pleased to have you, and thank you for your insights. We always learn from you a lot, and thank you for your time, and everyone who participated in this Zoom call. I think this is the end of our conversation, unfortunately, because of the time, and looking forward to having you again on board. Thank you so much.
Sammy, always a pleasure to see you and to be with you, and thank you for having me.
Thanks a lot.
And thank you to all the guests. Thank you.